On a hot August afternoon in 1980, in a cramped, rented house in West Los Angeles, silence settled over a locked bedroom that smelled of gunpowder and cheap cologne. By nightfall, two bodies would be found there, naked, broken, and arranged in a tableau that looked less like a crime scene and more like a sick final performance. This was not the end Hollywood had written for her. Just months earlier, she had stood in the bright California sun as cameras flashed and men in suits announced that she was Playboy's 1980 Playmate of the Year, a 20-year-old Canadian girl who had somehow crossed the border and stepped straight into America's most seductive fantasy. She was blonde, soft-spoken, and almost shy, yet the industry was already calling her the next big thing. Films, magazine covers, late-night talk shows, everything was finally opening up. But while Hollywood was falling in love with Dorothy Stratten, another man was losing control. Paul Snider, the husband who had discovered her behind the counter of a Vancouver Dairy Queen, was watching his creation slip out of his hands and into a world where he no longer belonged. Behind the glossy photographs and studio lights, their marriage had turned into a pressure cooker of jealousy, surveillance, and rage. On August 14th, 1980, Dorothy agreed to meet Paul one last time in that West Los Angeles house to talk about money, lawyers, and how to end a marriage that should never have begun. She walked in as a rising star with a film just finished and a new life waiting for her. Hours later, she lay dead from a 12-gauge shotgun blast, her face destroyed, her body violated, and her killer's corpse beside her. The murder-suicide sent a shockwave through Hollywood, tore open the carefully crafted Playboy fantasy, and left a single brutal question hanging in the air. How does a girl who has everything the world wants end up alone in a locked room with the man who cannot stand to let her go? The girl Hollywood wanted, and the girl who never believed she belonged there. Dorothy Stratten entered the world quietly without privilege, glamour, or any hint of the extraordinary fate awaiting her. Born in 1960 in a modest Vancouver household, she grew up in the kind of environment that rarely produces Hollywood stars. Small apartments, secondhand clothes, and a family struggling to make ends meet. She was gentle, polite, almost painfully shy, the kind of girl who apologized even when she did nothing wrong. In high school, teachers described her as sweet, soft-spoken, and almost invisible. She had no ambitions for fame, no dreams of lights or cameras. She worked part-time at a local Dairy Queen to support her mother and younger siblings. Customers noticed her beauty, but Dorothy never saw it as something that could change her life. Paul Snider did. He was flashy, loud, obsessed with attention, the complete opposite of Dorothy's calm innocence. When he walked into the Dairy Queen one afternoon and saw her behind the counter, he didn't just see a girl, he saw potential. He saw opportunity. He saw a ticket out of the life he hated. Paul convinced Dorothy to take professional photos, then sent them to Playboy without telling her what world he was pulling her into. Only when Hugh Hefner's team responded with interest did Dorothy understand how radically her life was about to transform. At 18, she flew to Los Angeles, terrified, inexperienced, but glowing with a natural beauty that made even seasoned photographers pause. She didn't know how to pose. She didn't know how to flirt with the camera. And yet, the lens loved her. Playboy loved her. Hollywood loved her. Suddenly, the girl who grew up believing she was ordinary became a rising icon. She earned Model of the Month, then Playmate of the Year, and doors began opening faster than she could process. Film directors, agents, producers, everyone wanted Dorothy Stratten. She was changing, growing, stepping into confidence she never had before. But Paul Snider was watching every step, and what he saw scared him. Dorothy was no longer the shy girl who needed him. Hollywood was shaping her into someone he couldn't control, someone who didn't rely on him for validation or survival. To the world, Dorothy Stratten was becoming a star. To Paul Snider, she was slipping away, and nothing terrified him more. Dorothy Stratten's ascent wasn't just fast, it was explosive. Within a single year, she went from an unknown Dairy Queen cashier to one of the most talked-about faces in Los Angeles. Playboy Mansion staff described her as a rare combination of innocence and star power. someone who lit up a room without trying, someone who made even the most jaded Hollywood executives soften their voice when speaking to her. She wasn't a typical playmate. Dorothy had something deeper, a softness, a vulnerability, a quiet intelligence that made people protective of her. Hugh Hefner saw it immediately. Photographers saw it. Producers saw it. Soon film offers arrived from major studios, including roles in Galaxina, and they all laughed, directed by acclaimed filmmaker Peter Bogdanovich. Bogdanovich didn't just see a playmate, he saw an actress. A real one. He believed Dorothy could become the next Marilyn Monroe. Not because of her beauty, but because of the way she carried emotion in her eyes. On set, she was eager, curious, and humble. She asked questions. She stayed after hours. She practiced lines over and over again, terrified of disappointing the people who believed in her. Hollywood was falling hard for Dorothy Stratten. Magazines featured her as the new American blonde. Casting directors circled her name. Talk shows requested interviews. Her future was expanding faster than she could catch her breath. And in this new world, filled with fame, opportunity, glamour, Dorothy finally tasted something she had never truly experienced with Paul Snider. Freedom. For the first time, she felt she could choose her own friends, shape her own career, build her own identity. She grew close to the cast and crew of They All Laughed, especially Bogdanovich, who treated her not as a trophy but as an artist. Their bond deepened. Paul noticed. Paul noticed everything. While Dorothy was rising, Paul Snider was collapsing. He was no longer allowed inside the Playboy mansion. Producers kept him away from film sets. People in Hollywood whispered that he was toxic, a parasite feeding on Dorothy's success. The more Dorothy shined, the smaller Paul became. And the smaller he felt, the more dangerous he grew. By mid-1980, Dorothy had taken the bravest step of her life. She moved out of the home she shared with Paul. To the world she was blossoming. To Paul, she was escaping. And he would not accept that. The moment Dorothy stepped out of Paul Snider's orbit, everything darkened. Paul had always been possessive, but now he became unhinged. He had built his entire identity around discovering Dorothy, shaping her, guiding her, controlling her. Without her, he was nothing, and he knew it. His friends later said he spoke about her with a mix of obsession and panic, as if she were slipping through his fingers like sand. Dorothy, meanwhile, was experiencing a life she never imagined possible. She was filming They All Laughed. She was surrounded by people who admired her, protected her, respected her. She was falling deeper into a world where she was treated as a person, not a possession. Her relationship with director Peter Bogdanovich became more than professional. It grew slowly, quietly, painfully, because Dorothy was still legally married to Paul, and Paul was watching everything from the shadows. Their separation only fueled his paranoia. He stalked her, questioned her friends, called her obsessively, followed her career news like a man tracking the enemy. Playboy security warned Dorothy that Paul was unstable. Hefner himself advised her to stay away from him, but Dorothy felt responsible for the man who had discovered her. In her gentle heart, she believed she owed him closure. Instead, Paul wanted control. He bugged phones. He read her mail. He showed up uninvited to parties and sets. He purchased weapons. He told friends he would never let her go. Meanwhile, Dorothy was trying to finalize the separation, a move Paul took as betrayal. Every new success she gained felt, to him, like a personal attack. Every photo shoot, every magazine cover, every film role widened the gap between their two worlds. Paul lived in a cheap rental house with roommates he barely knew. Dorothy lived in luxury hotels with film stars and industry moguls. He was drowning. She was rising. In early August 1980, Dorothy returned from New York with plans to move forward in her career and forward in her life without Paul. She wanted fairness. She wanted peace. She wanted to settle things calmly and safely. Paul wanted none of that. He was broke, angry, humiliated. He had lost Playboy, Hollywood, and now Dorothy. All he had left was the illusion that she still belonged to him. Friends later recalled Paul saying one sentence over and over, "If I can't have her, nobody will." And in his mind, that was not a threat. It was a decision. August 14th, 1980. Dorothy Stratten woke up knowing she had to do something she had been avoiding for weeks. Meet Paul Snider, alone. She didn't want to go. Friends begged her not to go. Playboy staff warned her it wasn't safe. Even Hugh Hefner reportedly said, "Don't meet him in private, not now." But Dorothy was kind. Too kind. She believed that ending a marriage, even a toxic, frightening one, deserved compassion. She thought she could calm Paul down, offer him financial support, and close this chapter without violence. She didn't understand how dangerous he had become. Around noon, Dorothy left the home she shared temporarily with the Bogdanovich family and drove to the small rental house Paul had been staying in, a rundown place he shared with two roommates, neither of whom were home that afternoon. Inside that house, Paul had been preparing. He bought a used 12-gauge Mossberg shotgun just days earlier. He borrowed money he didn't intend to repay. He wrote disturbing notes. He cleaned the bedroom obsessively. He arranged photographs of Dorothy. He was creating a stage, the stage for his final act. At approximately 12:30 p.m., Dorothy arrived. Neighbors heard nothing. No yelling, no struggle, no voices, just silence. Investigators believe the conversation was brief, perhaps 10 to 15 minutes. Paul likely confronted her about the separation, about Bogdanovich, about the life she was building without him. Dorothy, gentle as always, tried to explain, tried to soothe, tried to leave the door open for peaceful closure. But Paul wasn't listening. He had already made up his mind. Sometime between 12:30 p.m. and 1 p.m., he raped Dorothy. Moments later, he pressed the shotgun to her face and pulled the trigger at close range. The blast was so violent that even seasoned investigators were shaken. That was only the beginning. For hours, the house remained still. Dorothy's body left on the floor, a grotesque mirror of the beauty she had become. Paul wandered the house in shock, wrote rambling notes, and finally lay beside her before turning the gun on himself. At 11 p.m., one of Paul's roommates returned home. He assumed the locked bedroom meant Paul was with a girl, but through the door, he saw blood on the wall. He called police. They forced the door open. What they found inside became one of the most horrifying scenes in Hollywood history. Dorothy's body destroyed, Paul's corpse beside hers, a shotgun on the floor, a staged, tragic tableau of possessiveness and violence. The next morning, the news exploded across America. A rising star murdered at the peak of her fame. A jealous husband driven to madness. Hollywood left stunned, grieving, and forever changed. Dorothy Stratten had been on the edge of a new life. She never got to take the first step. Dorothy Stratten's death did not end with the police report. It detonated through Hollywood like a bomb. In the days that followed, newspapers across America printed her face on every front page. The glowing Playmate of the Year beside headlines filled with words like murder, jealousy, betrayal, and Hollywood nightmare. The nation was stunned not only by the brutality of the crime, but by the innocence of the victim. How could someone so gentle, so promising, so universally admired die in such a horrific way? The Playboy empire was shaken to its core. Hugh Hefner publicly condemned Paul Snider, calling him a hustler, a pimp, a predator. But critics accused Playboy of ignoring the warning signs, of pushing Dorothy into fame faster than she could emotionally handle it, of failing to protect her from a man everyone knew was dangerous. The scandal stained the brand for years. For director Peter Bogdanovich, the tragedy destroyed everything. He was in love with Dorothy, deeply, sincerely, and her death shattered him. He poured millions of dollars into re-editing They All Laughed as a tribute to her, bankrupting himself in the process. He later published a book, The Killing of the Unicorn, blaming Playboy for abandoning Dorothy. His career never fully recovered. Meanwhile, Paul Snider became a symbol of male possessiveness and violence, a cautionary tale about what happens when obsession replaces love and control replaces respect. But above all, the world mourned Dorothy. To millions, she became the Marilyn Monroe of her generation, the beautiful blonde who never got to finish her story. Her life was the perfect Hollywood arc, the rise from poverty to stardom, the discovery of talent and beauty, the blossoming of confidence, followed by a fall so tragic it still haunts the industry 40 years later. Today, documentaries, true crime videos, books, and films continue to revisit her story. Each generation rediscovers her. Each generation asks the same heartbreaking question: why wasn't she saved? Dorothy Stratten remains a symbol of everything intoxicating and everything dangerous about Hollywood. She was grace in a world built on desire. She was innocence in a world that profits from fantasy. She shined too brightly, and someone tried to cage the light. But even in death, Dorothy became more powerful than Paul Snider ever imagined. Her story reshaped conversations about abuse, control, and the risks faced by young women in the entertainment industry. She was meant to become a star. Hollywood made her one, but it was her tragedy and not her fame that made her immortal. And in every photograph, every documentary, every whispered retelling of her final hours, one truth remains. Dorothy Stratten didn't die because she was weak. She died because she finally found the strength to leave.